Good evening and welcome. We're going to get started here in just a second. Well, welcome to each of you. If we have not met before, my name is Brian De Palma, and I'm the associate pastor here at Willow Avenue Mennonite Church. It is a delight to be able to welcome each of you to a continuation of our local Indigenous history and realities series. This series is growing out of questions we've been asking as a congregation about how to be better relatives with all those whose lives intersect with ours. So we are grateful that you are here with us tonight to be part of these important conversations. Last week, Dr. Good got us going by exploring local Indigenous history and including how local Indigenous people negotiated some of the realities of colonization, and that will be the bulk of the topic of tonight's presentation by Cristina Gonzalez. If you missed Dr. Good's presentation, it is available on our church's website or on YouTube if you'd like to catch up. But we are delighted to be able to welcome Cristina to speak with us tonight. Many of you know her. If you don't, she is a lecturer in the American Indian Studies program at Fresno State University, and if I did my homework right, has an MA from the John F. Kennedy University. So it's an honor to have her with us tonight. Next week, we will be continuing the series with Audrey Osborne and Kenny Barrios, who will talk about the contemporary realities and experiences of local Indigenous people. In just a moment, we will welcome Cristina to take it over from here, and after she concludes her presentation, we will have a time for you all to ask some questions of her. Anticipating that, I'll encourage you to be thinking in advance about any questions you might like to ask. Keep it concise and focused to a sentence or two. Make sure there's a question mark at the end so she knows what to respond to. Before we get started and I hand it over to Cristina, I want to extend a special thanks to our Seeking Repair with Indigenous Communities team for their support of this series. And with that, let's hand it over to Cristina, who we are all here to hear. Please join me in welcoming Cristina.
Thank you very much. Whoa. Okay, very good. So, Haku Leah, hello everyone. Haku Kichichanti ke Kikikich, Cristina Gonzalez Kakti, Kopanesh Humalok Muwu, which is Point Magoo, the Apu, which is Simi Valley, Limu, which is Santa Cruz, Glikanhi Visalia, Gushichichi Kutiyan. So what I'm saying is I'm introducing myself in my language and I'm telling you my ancestral villages, right? So that's Point Magoo, that's Santa Cruz Island, and that is Simi Valley. So before I begin, I wanted to just mention I do teach American Indian Studies at Fresno State. I am the cultural registrar for Santa Rosa Rancheria. So I help take care of some of their very precious things, like their baskets and some of their archaeological material. And I have the wonderful honor to work with a great group of people in the cultural department. And I really love what I do, especially teaching. Teaching is one of the things that I really love to do. So I'm very honored to be here with you and sharing this space. So thank you, and I'm very honored to be asked to be here. Thank you. So thank you very much for considering me and inviting me to come speak. So I'm going to be talking about negotiating colonization. What is that? What is negotiating colonization? What does that look like? So I have some wonderful slides. This previous slide, that's right here, this image that you see, that is a picture of the Channel Islands. And that's part of where my homeland is. So my mother's mother, all of where my maternal line comes from is from these islands here. And so before I get started on talking about negotiating colonization, I want to place us, right? So Uncle Ron last week talked about California, talked about its vastness, right? California has the most number of diverse tribes, the most number of diverse languages. This is what it looks like. This is what it looks like, right? So you see all these different colors on the map of California, on the bottom map where it says tribal groups. Those are all of the different tribal groups in California. And within one of those colors, you have it divided up into different tribes and different dialects. And that's where that other map comes in. And those are the language families of California. And California has the most. California has the most of all of this. And you can see it's color coordinated. In the image that's to the left of it, those are some traditional home structures for our Yokuts area. And this is where we are today. We are in Yokuts territory today. So just to give you an idea of what we're dealing with and where you are, I forgot to put a little dot. But if you see that piece of water, that body of water right there on the map, that is the Tulare Lake. So you're just north of there. You're just north of there. Tulare Lake would be where Santa Rosa, Rancheria, and the Tachi people are from this lake, which keeps coming back. And Kenny will be talking about that next week. So what does negotiating colonization look like? What does it look like? And rather than words, I thought, oh, pictures. Pictures can convey so much information. And then I don't have to try to read them from down here either. But when we're talking about negotiating colonization, I'm not just talking about California was invaded. No, it starts way, 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 way before that. So a long time ago, we have nothing but indigenous people all around the United States, all around California, all around in this area. And one of the things to keep in mind is that as Native people, we are connected to our environment. We are connected to all of the things in our areas. We're connected to the land, to the animals, and to the plants. We're connected to each other. We have stories of these places. We have stories of these plants. We know these plants, right? Just like these beautiful pictures that you have of the watershed. Those are the natives from here, right? Those are the native birds and plants that are from here. They have a relationship to this place. They have ties to this place that span generations and generations. So no matter what archaeologists and some scientists might have you believe, Native people, we've been here since the beginning of time itself. We've also been gambling since the beginning of time itself, but that's a whole other story. But we've been here forever, and we have stories. Our stories tie us to our place. Our stories tell us how we came to be. There's lots of our Yokut stories that tell us, right, how we got our hands. They tell us, they also have morals inside of them. They have stories, they have ethical stories in them. The Chumash, we have a story about a wood rat, and was it a coyote? I don't remember. And the coyote's trying to trick the wood rat into coming out because he wants to eat him, of course. And so he's telling this wood rat, hey, I have a grape. You should come out. You should come out and get this grape and come and eat it. And so the wood rat somehow ends up in the coyote's mouth. And you'd think that it was the end of it, right? For this little poor wood rat, but no. The coyote is so boisterous. He starts yapping his mouth of how he was able to talk somebody into jumping in his mouth, that the mouse was able to escape, right? So the moral of the story is, right, don't be boisterous, right? So a lot of our stories have these, they have our origin stories in here. They tell us how we came to be, right? For us Chumash people, we all stem from the Chumash Islands. We all stem from the Channel Islands. And at one point, there was so many people on the island, we had to leave. We had to go somewhere where we can really multiply. And Hutash, the earth, and the sky gods, they got together, and Hutash had begged the sky god to help us create a rainbow bridge that can go across. But if they looked down, they're going to get dizzy. So they had to hurry up across this rainbow bridge, right? So as they went across, of course, we're going to look down. We're going to look down at the ocean, and some of us are going to fall. And so Hutash, the Mother Earth, God said, don't let my people die. Please help them. You know, they're in the middle of an ocean. Help them. And so they ended up, this guy, God, felt bad. And so he said, okay. And so he turned them into the dolphins, and he turned them into the swordfish, and he turned them into the whales, and he turned them into all of our animal life today. But can you see how these stories tie my people to the island? Can you see how these stories tie my people to the ocean and to these animals, right? It's the same thing here, right? Kenny will tell you some stories next week, and he'll tell you how our people are connected. We're connected to our land, we're connected to our environment. And at some point, somebody thought it was a good idea in Europe to have a series of these papal decrees that they called the papal bulls, which was the doctrine of discovery. So if you're not familiar with some of history, these documents would then be the authorization for European explorers to travel into areas and conquer places that were not what we call civilized. If they were not already people that believed in God, they could be colonized and they could be exploited, right? So that's what that document did in the 14 and 1500s. Right? So then you have our wonderful Spanish explorers coming into California. And they visited a bunch of different areas, but they had papers that said, we can colonize, we can do these things, we can do these things, and it's not going to matter. So they land in different parts, right? They land in different parts. California, with our vast west coast and our oceans, they make their way to California. In this context, I don't think colonization was able to get negotiated during this time. Because at this time, because we did not necessarily believe in the God that they believed in, we weren't necessarily considered people. We weren't considered human. And so therefore, we were non-negotiable. We were non-negotiable. You could not negotiate with us. And so that is to me the first step in negotiating colonization. Native people are left out. We are not included in this. We didn't say, come over and bless you. We didn't have the ability to say, don't come over here. Don't, stay away, or don't treat us bad, or don't take our land, or don't, some of these conversations didn't happen. It was just it was like a takeover. And one of the things to understand about some of these initial colonizations, and especially in California, we have waves of this, right? We have waves. Our people have stories of Hawaiians visiting and Japanese people visiting, all these different people visiting because of our ancient currents, and they were able to visit us. That's how they had found their way too, right? Was some of the Spanish people, but they did not colonize us. They did not colonize us. It was just the Spanish people that did at this time. But there were waves of colonization. You also have the American waves of colonization. You also have the American people, right? So you have, I don't know if anybody's familiar with California state history, right? And the discovery of gold. The discovery of gold. So I love history. I have my undergraduate degree in history, so I love history. So part of history, and especially of California, is you have lots of native people connected to the land. You have the Spanish people coming, colonizing. Part of that colonization is the missions. And a lot of people say, oh, the mission system, it started in California. No, it didn't. The mission system started in Mexico. And they were so successful with colonizing the indigenous people of Mexico, they just went straight up the coast. In California, of course, San Diego is one of the first missions that was established in California. That's actually a bonus point in one of my classes. The first mission in California was established in San Diego. The mission system did not start in California, right? During this mission system, you have the removal of native people from their homeland. You have that disconnection, that immediate disconnection from the homeland. You have the separation of families, you have the separation of men and women, you have the separation of children, and you have a whole complete different way of life. And that comes survival, right? So a lot of our Native people in California, and especially in Southern California, one of our survival languages, guess what? Guess what it is? Spanish. Because if you were able to speak Spanish, that means you were able to get job, right? After secularization, you were able to get a job. You were able to also say that you were not Native. So if I could speak Spanish, I'm not Native. I'll be Mexican, because then I won't be considered Native, and I won't be tied to a place. One of the things about California too is we didn't have slavery, right? That was one of the issues with California becoming a state, right? Was California become a slave state or a free state? California was a free state.
It was a free state, except they had slaves among the indigenous people.
Yeah, that is the unofficial slavery. Not to mention the people that came before California was a state, right? For the gold rush, right? Gold discovered in California, 1848, wasn't announced, first time 48, was announced in 1945, 49. Then you have this mad rush, people bringing their slaves. And so you have what we call kind of unofficial indentured servitude in California. And you have people taken away from their families. Once again, right, this happened during the mission time, but now you have California statehood, and you have the very first governor of California, terrible guy, but he was the one that instituted some of these state laws that said Indians could be rounded up if they weren't working, if they weren't doing anything in particular. They could be rounded up. So I would definitely rather be somebody else than be a Native person during that time, right? You also have during the same time, so California became a state on September 9th, 1850. Not that long ago, I think. It's pretty fresh. And so you have California becoming a state, and then that's when you have the very first American governor of California. And it's also during this time, too, that a lot of people don't know that your California Constitution, our original Constitution for California, was actually written in English and in Spanish. It was written in English and in Spanish, and some of the early laws in California were also written in English and in Spanish. And then after, again, some of that settler colonization amongst some of the Americans were pushing out the Spanish, and some of the Californios, they were pushing them out, and so they were able to regain a lot of land. And so pretty soon, laws weren't written in English and Spanish anymore. And where are the Native people during this time? What are they doing? What's going on? Right? They're indentured, right? They're being hunted down because one of the very first laws that the governor said was that this was for the safety and the protection, right? But this was just for the safety and protection of immigrants coming into California. And it was a legal bounty on Native people, where they had private militias, they had private military that was able to go and hunt down Native people, Native families, men, women, children. They were hunted down, and they, when they brought in scalps of the Native people, they were given money. And this was financed by the state of California. This was also financed by the federal government during the same time too, right? So if you can understand what Native people in California have been experiencing, right? I know this is a history lesson, but this is part of colonization. This is all what's happening to Native people during this time, right? We're not even talking about manifest destiny. We're not even talking about the East Coast and their movement west of the Mississippi. We're not even talking about that. We're not even talking about the displacement of Native people. When we have colonization, we're talking about the displacement of everybody and everything, right? That would also include the animals. That would also include the plants, right? Because when people are coming into a new territory, what are they bringing? Their livestock. Guess what they have in their hooves, right? They're bringing invasive species, right, Chris? They're bringing all of these things, right? So even the invasive plants are taking over, and the other people are taking over, and you have this push of Native and Indigenous people. So when we have California statehood, we also have federal treaty negotiators coming into California And these people are negotiating these treaties with the California tribes. And they're saying, we do this all the time. You can see there's 2 of them right there. Those 3 treaty negotiators that came to California. There's 2 of them right there, and I can't remember their names right now. And they come into California, and they're negotiating treaties. And they're telling the people, hey, we do, and mind you, they're rounding up all the guys, because the guys are the ones that know everything and they're in power. Not knowing that there's women that are the chiefs, the leaders of their people, but they grab the guys anyways, right? They grab everybody and they tell them, hey, you know what? We negotiate treaties all the time. Why don't you take this land over here? Go ahead and start heading over there. We'll take care of this. You know, so all these people, you have the movement of people, right? When you have coming out of indentured servitude, mind you, no rights. No rights. These aren't considered people still. And you have these people moving. And what happens? By the time those federal treaty negotiators get back to the East Coast, California finds out about all of these negotiations these treaty people were doing. And they wanted to negotiate lots of really good land that the native people here did not even deserve. They didn't even appreciate the land that they had. They didn't appreciate it, not one bit. And so they shouldn't get it. And so the California legislature at the time said, please do not ratify these treaties. Don't ratify them. That's what Ron was talking about last week, right? Those 18 unratified treaties. And so there you have it. All these native people moving to all these different areas. Some of these areas were out of their traditional places. Oops, did I press something? Moving out of their traditional places, bringing their families with them into these new lands, right? Remember, native people have ties to their immediate area. They have these ties to their places, and they're being moved to other places. And so these treaties, they don't get negotiated. They don't get ratified. And they just kind of go into the archives. You can see them right now. I should have put a little picture. You can see them. They're in Washington, D.C. They're in a safe right now. But they're not nothing, right? But then the federal government at some point realizes, oh, we got a bunch of homeless Indians here. We got a whole bunch of homeless Indians. What are we going to do with them? We were able to negotiate some of these reservations, but what are we going to do with all of these Indian people that we can't put them somewhere? Because remember, during this entire time, we've been the Indian problem. We've been the Indian problem. We're the pests. We're the ones that are in the way of these things, right? We're in the way of colonization. And so what ends up happening is we are in the way, and how do we get out of the way? How do we find a place for these homeless Indians, right? And that's where you have the Rancheria Act. Have you guys ever wondered why California has reservations and rancherias? Yeah, that's a good question. And that's because after 1871, treaties were no longer able to be negotiated. And so what do you do with these homeless Indians in California that thought they were going to have a treaty and now they don't? What do you do with these homeless Indians? Well, the federal government and the state of California buy some land to move those Indians onto that land. And we're not going to call it reservations. We're going to call it rancherias, right? And you'd think it was just one group of people. No, sometimes you had different groups and different dialects of people that were placed together on this rancheria together on the same place. And that's what we have today. And that's what Native people have been experiencing with what we call colonization, right? And then, of course, there's lots of federal and state laws that have helped contribute to the assimilation of Native people, right? We weren't considered citizens of the United States until 1924. I think Ron mentioned that last week, too. So if you're not a citizen, I don't think you have very many rights, do you? You're not able to air any of some of these grievances that you may have, or maybe your family might have, right? But do you think we're still experiencing colonization? Do you think Native people are still negotiating colonization today? Yeah, we are. We're still negotiating this relationship that we have, right, in our own homelands. How do we get to be Native? How do we stay Native? How can we be Native in places that now have buildings and a bunch of different people? I mean, we love you guys, but we have stories of these places. You know, the animals that were once here, you can't find them anymore. The plants that were once here are not here anymore. The grasslands that were here, they're not here anymore. The waters that used to run, they've been diverted. What do, right? So what does it still look like, right? There's ICWA. ICWA is being questioned. So we have the Indian Child Welfare Act. For a long time, Native children were being removed from their Native families and placed into non-Native homes where they were disconnected from their culture and from their people and their families. And that is being contested today. We're fighting to keep our families still together. We're still fighting to speak our language. We're still fighting to have access back to our traditional lands. We're still fighting for the remains of our ancestors that are in museums. Do you know there had to be a law? Laws are wonderful because laws make people do things sometimes people don't want to do, right? Like think Civil Rights Act, right? Think Religious Freedom Act, right? Somebody is not doing something somewhere, right? So we have a law that's called the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. And what this does, it says, hey, museums, hey, institutions, you know, if you get any federal funding, you're going to have to return these ancestors. Can you imagine fighting to get the remains of your ancestors from a museum? Who does that? Well, I'll tell you who it is. It's the people that don't have rights and are not considered human. We're the ones that have to deal with fighting for our ancestors. And so that's negotiating colonization. That's what it looks like today. That's what negotiating colonization looks like today. I have to keep track of my time. I like to talk a lot. So that's what it looks like today. And how are we still doing it? How are we still negotiating, but how are we negotiating in our own terms? How are we negotiating and how are we staying Native in our own terms? Right? And it might look like this. In my family, this is what it looks like. In my community, this is what it looks like. Right? Like reclaiming, taking back, as Kenny said. Right? How do we negotiate colonization when you have LA City Hall that you're dancing in front of, right? And how does it look when you also have a former Los Angeles County Superior Court judge that's also one of our relatives that's bringing back some of our languages that we weren't allowed to speak for so many years, right? This is what reclaiming and taking that unnegotiated colonization back. Now that Native people, right, we have the ability to speak English, get degrees, right, play on the same level field as others. And how do we use this to our advantage too in getting that information back? How do we speak, how do we get back speaking our language? How are we able to still practice our traditions? How are we still able to weave baskets that we weren't able to make, that our ancestors weren't able to make? And that some of these things were secret for so long. How do we do that? And that's something I think that we're still dealing with today. And when we're thinking of our local people and we're thinking of some of the experiences in California, mind you, Indigenous people around the world are going through this same thing because we've all been colonized. We've all been colonized, right? Everywhere. When we're thinking, Philippines, Japan, everywhere, Africa. We can go on about all of the different colonization. And you can know who the colonizer is by the language, right? What do they speak in Mexico? They speak Spanish. So who do you think their colonizer was? Right? Spain. And so that's always a reminder in the back of our head. And it's something in my family that I'm always fighting with too. Christine, how come you don't speak Spanish? Well, I don't know. It's a colonizer language. I'm trying to learn my traditional Chumash language. And it's how do we bring those things back? How do we decolonize ourselves, right? After we've been negotiating colonization for so long, for centuries. How do we do that? But I'd like to open this dialogue because I'm in my classroom. I like to lecture for a minute. And then I like to talk because I can see in your heads, maybe some of you guys are thinking, yeah, that's right, Cristina. Or maybe you have another example, or maybe you want to shed some light, or you have a comment. But I like to discuss things because I feel like that's how we all learn, right? Visual, I think I was talking about this with somebody earlier. We all learn different, and we all process things different. And for me, I like to talk about things because I feel like that's how we all learn. That's how I learn. Right? So does anybody have any questions? I want to make sure I leave time so that we can talk because I can just keep talking. Anybody have any questions or have any comments or anything anybody want to add? Yeah. Oh,
Over to you, because we have some folks on Zoom and they won't be able to hear otherwise.
Yeah, I just have a comment, I guess, maybe a question too. Because in my mind, like a negotiation is something where both people get something beneficial maybe, but it kind of seems like it's not really a negotiation when one party kind of has like a threat or a power dynamic. So yeah, I guess if it were a negotiation, what would be something beneficial like an indigenous community would get from the colonizers? Like, is it possible for it to be a negotiation, or is it just like something that's a threat that you're just having to try to work with, I guess, or something like that? That makes sense.
And that's the $1 million question. How? What can I get some land back? Can I get some plants back? Can I get some cultural burns back? You know, how does it look like? Because we're all here now. We're all here. So how does that look like? I don't know. But that means talking, right? How can we do some of this and some of that? Because now we're all here, right? We're still fighting, but how we're here. We're all at the table. How do we negotiate this? What can we do, right? If somebody owns some property, hey, can I get access? Because I'm always looking for access because I don't want to trespass. But how do I get access? You know, maybe it's that relationship building. And that's why I love like some of the conservancies and some of the other places that are very beautiful and they have natural plants and they have our native plants growing and building relationships with them so that we can access that, so we can get our material, so we can make those baskets again, right? But it's a different kind of negotiating. It's, you know, like the scratching of the back, right? I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine. What can I do for you? What can you do for me? And I think that's the way it looks. But people have been chipping at us for so long. You know, we don't even know sometimes what are we asking for. You know, we say everything, right? We want land back. We want our ancestors back. We want all of these things back. But, you know, can we really get them? Can we get pieces of them at a time, right? That's $1 million question. Thank you.
So Cristina, to kind of go in a little bit different direction, so maybe because I haven't had dinner yet, I was thinking I've worked with salmon and fisheries and other things for most of my career, and in our area, there are animals that are gone, and the culture that went with preparing and eating those, we know it was very important from just talking to some of the, you know, seeing some of the first things in the stories that your people have put together. Just some of the ideas of how you can recapture. I know you've done it with plants, and I know you've done it with, you know, language and other things to try and recapture some of the things that were nearly lost. But I'm kind of thinking on the food culture too, and I know, you know, working with the tribe that you're working with now, with the Tachi, with the Lupna and the saltgrass, there's some pretty cool stuff out there. But the big floater mussel that used to be out there all over, there's middens that have just tremendous amount of shells from those. How do you recapture the preparation and the culture that went with those?
Right, that's a good question. So we're talking about places that are asleep right now, right? Because in order to have food preparation, you have to have the food. In order for the food to grow, you're going to have the water. And in order to have the water, you need to make sure there's no pesticides and toxic material in it. And in order to make sure there's no toxic, you can keep going, right? So all of these things are related to each other, and they all affect each other. They all affect each other. So for me, when it comes to food, because I love food, how do we bring some of these things back? We can bring some of these things back already, but if there were no dams, if there was no pumping of the groundwater, if there was free-flowing water, if we didn't allow pesticides in the farms, and especially like in Tulare, in this entire valley, right, very fertile, you're going to have all these pesticides in the water. How do we get the pesticides out of the water? Then we'll have food prep. But how do we do that in the meantime? And we do that little pieces at a time, right? We have people that make acorn, people that go fishing, people that go hunting. But we always, did somebody test the elk? Did somebody test the elk? Is it good to eat? You know, how's that salmon over there? Was that farm fished or was that farmed? Because, you know, that's probably going to be a little bit healthier. You know, and so there's a lot of things to consider. So I would love food prep, but I feel like it's tied to so many other issues. It's tied to so many other issues that we're dealing with. Yeah, I hope I answered the question.
I had a question concerning, how do I put this? Do you happen to know what a native negotiation would look like? Like a negotiation between two natives? Hypothetically, let's say one was failing, maybe misguided leadership, so another would come to help or seize, or I don't know. But do you know what it looked like pre-colonial?
Oh, well, yeah, that would involve a lot of formalities of things. So when we're talking traditionally, just like the Yokuts, some of the Yokuts people and my people, we used to trade a long time ago. We'd trade things that, you know, just like supply and demand, right? Whatever we have, some of the things they want some abalone, they want some olivella, they need some clamshells. Well, what do you got, Yokuts? Oh, we got some elk meat, we got some fresh water dried mussels, and so some of that negotiation would go, but there'd always be a cost for things too, right? So not only are you trading things, sometimes if I was invading in a certain area, there would be also, well, what are you doing in my area? You need to pay me. There'd be disagreements. I mean, we're all human, right? But how that negotiation would look like, not I'm going to massacre everybody. That would look like, if you're going to be fishing in our area, well, what are you going to give me? All right, we'll give you some fish. Or I'll give you this. And then we're paying, you know. And so that's how that negotiation would look like. That I'm assuming it would look like. From what I've read and what I've been told, that's how it would look like. And one of the things to remember about this is that it wasn't just negotiations like that. You have to understand, people had been trading forever. And so when they're trading forever, what happens at some of these trading events, right? Because you're not just going to a store. You have to send a messenger. Hey, we're going to be meeting, and let's have a meeting to trade. And so it wouldn't just be we're going to trade. We're going to get together. We're going to eat. We're going to socialize. We're going to gamble. We're going to play games. And then people are going to hook up. You'd also have relationship building. So whenever you were having a disagreement, you probably had some family members married into that area and that tribe. So would you really want to be taking a violent turn? I don't know. I'm sure there was, but it would be a little bit hard if you're killing one of your relatives too. So there was a lot of careful negotiations, I'm assuming. Yeah. Thank you.
There was one question from somebody on Zoom asking if you could re-describe the distinction between reservation and rancheria again.
That's going to be on a test on the midterm.
Somebody's getting ready for the test.
I knew it was one of my students. So the differences. So let's talk about this, right? So you have the Indian Appropriations Act, and there's several versions of this. And one of the iterations of this was in 68? Was it 68? 71. 68 was a treaty of Fort Laramie. 71 that says, we're not going to negotiate any more treaties. But before that time, if you notice in California, there are some reservations, right? Tule River Reservation. There's a couple in Southern California. So there's a couple of reservations that were established, and there's a certain criteria of how reservations and people are federally recognized, right? There's negotiations, there's an act of Congress. So there's different ways. And so those reservations were established before. After that, you can't establish a reservation because that would require a treaty which cannot be negotiated anymore. So in California, only in the beautiful state of California do you have rancherias because we have 18 unratified treaties. And you had a need. You had a need to find a place for these. And I say homeless because that's what it said in the law. The homeless Indian. How can you be homeless in California if you're native? But how, these homeless Indians need a place. And so we can't call them reservations, and so we're going to call them rancherias. So California is the only place, right? We're on the last of the frontier. And then by the time you get to Alaska, and then it gets all technical and some of these other. And then you get Hawaii. They have sovereign nations, but they're not recognized at all. But they're considered like Indian people. But that's just one of the, there's a certain year. Yeah. Are there any other questions? Oh, very good. Very good. Oh.
Seeing how nobody else raised their hand, I'll go again. So my wife and I are talking about going and visiting my son in England, and we're talking about going, there are several different ways you can go and see places. One of those is walking. And you can actually spend a lot of money on a walking tour. And I know Dr. Good, Ron, last week, 2 weeks, whenever he was, a little while ago, he had said, yeah, there are trails. And when you're in Europe, you're walking on trails that are 300, 400, 500 years old. And when we have trails here, we're usually talking something that's been put in place. Most of the trails that are recognized are just 50, maybe 40, 50, 60 years old. But you guys have trails. And I'm just wondering, Ron talked about recapturing those, but it'd be very interesting to see also the ones that came from the coast, where your folks were at, on over into the San Joaquin Valley and then to the foothills. And I just don't know if you want to expand on any of that, but the idea of recapturing the trails and the culture that went with that, and then turning it into something that's learning for future generations.
Oh, that's a good question. Because I can easily, with the trail, recapture an entire freeway. I can recapture some roads, because that's what they are today. So some of those trade routes, that went to the coast, that went up and down California, those were trade routes. Those were old trade routes that Native people had into the different areas. But, when we have people establishing roads, right, you have, oh, that's a new road right there, that's a trail. Let's make a road, because of course, right, the way of least resistance. Right? Why would you build something going some way when there's an easier way to go, right? So a lot of the roads today are those freeways. They are those highways. They are those roads. And so when we're recapturing them, it would be more interesting to see what that would have looked like prehistorically, right? There was probably some water, right? Who wants to go where there's no water? You better have a good reinforced basket that's covered in tar or pitch so you can haul water with you. But what would the environment look like if we could see those roads, hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago? Because that's how long people have been trading. And there's this really cool survey report, and it talks about all the different trade routes in California. And mind you, trade routes are something that span counties and states and countries, right? And with this report, it was really cool because it showed you what was coming in and what was going out. And it showed you some of these routes. And it's like, oh, wow, that's the 5. Oh, that's the, 43. That's the 46. Oh, that's the 80. And so these are now roads. but that's also how things made it to other places, right? And that also shows how Native people are all connected, not just in California, but how we're connected to all the indigenous people in Nevada and Oregon and Mexico, northern Mexico. You have all of these connections and all of these things that were traded, and those routes were places where people traveled. And if you look at it, I guarantee there's going to be food along the way. There's going to be all those plants and animals, and there's going to be water, right? And if you recapture it, you better come with snacks and some water, because none of those are there.
Christine.
Yeah.
So California has an intertribal agency, and California has an intertribal agency, and recently they were instrumental in helping the tribe that's in that Porterville area. That there's a reservation there, and I don't recall the name of it.
That's Tule River.
The Tule River tribe, okay. And so they, bordering their property, there were 2 large pieces that came up for sale. Can you speak to that?
So I am familiar with that, and that is part of that. So the governor of California has an initiative, and there's certain granting things that are happening in California to purchase land and to return it back. And there's so many different things right now that are happening, not only with private funding, but with different types of grant funding to get land and to find that land and to return it back to tribes. I don't know the specifics on that. We would have to ask somebody from Tule River leadership. But I do know that a lot of people are interested, and you'll see that, you've probably seen that movement to return land, right? But how does that look? Because sometimes, here's the land, right? But sometimes it's, okay, here's the land, but there's always these strings, right? That's negotiating colonization. There's all these strings attached. You can't build anything. You can't do this. You can't do that. Do I really get the land back?
It will be in conservancy.
Yeah.
So yeah, there will probably be restrictions, sadly. Thank you. I'm done.
Yeah, and so there would be some restrictions, which is really kind of, sometimes it's like, too bad we couldn't have like some kind of an educational center there, right? Or some kind of really cool camping area that we could put showers and bathrooms and make this accessible, not only for some of the tribal people to stay for extended periods of time, but maybe having the public come in, maybe having a place where the tribal people can show, like, see, this is what this area used to look like. This is what it does look like now. Or this is what we want it to look like. Or this is what it is, and this is our connection, to these grasses, and you can eat them, and blah, blah, blah. And so and it's really unfortunate because I don't know some of the details, but there is a big movement for that land back. But again, what does it look like? Are there strings attached? Are we still negotiating? Are we still negotiating colonization? Yeah.
I'm always amazed by what I don't know, continually learning things. I was born in Fresno, and so I feel like I'm always learning things that, why didn't they teach us these things in school? What's at the top of your reading list for people who are like me, trying to learn the things that we don't know, the things that they didn't teach us growing up in school?
Oh, there's a lot of reading. There's a lot.
What's your top 3?
I can't even think right now. There's some really good books on like the indigenous history of the United States. There's some really good ones on California, and I forgot to bring my reading list, and I do have one. So I'll make sure to bring it and somehow make it available. But there's some really neat academic writing that's been out and that's still coming out. And it's, through the lens of Native people discussing these things, right? Again, negotiating colonization, right? So when we're talking about history, you have your basic history. And I love it when my students are taking a regular history course at the university, and then they're taking one of mine. because they're learning, oh, that's what that, they're actually, killing two birds with one stone, because they're getting out all of the information that the other instructor is leaving out. And so how do we learn this, right? So there's ethnic studies courses now too. There's these requirements, right? There's Area 6. There's also, in high schools, ethnic studies requirements where we're going to be learning these things so we don't go through school not knowing these things. And we have a deeper respect and understanding for each other, and we can celebrate each other. And that's why I'm so thankful for some of, the new way we're moving in this direction. And hopefully it'll give us a better appreciation of each other. And of course, that was not just, here's some ethnic studies courses. That came on the back of people protesting in the 60s and 70s. That came out of demands for things, to have these things, in our classrooms today. Those things were fought for and negotiated a while back. So thank you so much. And I will have a reading list for you. But if there are no more questions or comments, I would like to say, sorry.
I know a lot about what the Cherokees are doing, particularly like in language, and I'm studying the language. What are some things that are doing, because I think in California it's even more drastic than with us. We had 2,000 people that were born first language speakers, and they're all my age or so, and but it's worse for a lot of natives in California. What's being done in California is here to save or preserve the language?
Very, very good question. So I have a good friend, and her name's Carly Tex, and she's the director for the for ICLES, which is the Advocates for Indigenous California Language Survival, and that is one of the organizations in California that helps California Indian tribes revive their sleeping language, right? Because we don't like to see it as dead. We like to see it as it's sleeping, to be awake, because the ancestors weren't allowed to speak it. How do we revive it? But also, one of the things to understand is that a lot of our languages, of course, they weren't written. They weren't written. A lot of them are recorded, and so that brings out a whole other can of worms. When somebody's recording it, if I'm writing down how you're saying something, it's my ears. Maybe somebody else can hear it, and they're hearing something different too. So it's really different. But for people, we love linguists, and we love. ICLES has a conference and a gathering every year where they are able to work at UC Berkeley and gather information and on their some of their language information that's there at the university. A lot of us work with linguists. One of our language teacher just became a linguist, and it's to help document our language, us document our language also moving forward, right? Coming with new words, putting new things together, because as Native people, we are not stuck. We're not stuck in the past. We're innovative, and we are always thinking of new things, and we're not stuck. We're always doing new things. And so how do we come up with new words, and how do we save it? Because before it was recorded, right? Somebody's recorded it on a wax cylinder. Today we're digitizing, we're recording, we're doing all of these really cool other things because we're not stuck. We're not stuck in the past. We're always thinking of new ways. But linguists and language is, oh man, again, those things are all connected. When we're talking about language, we're talking about food, right? We're talking about place. We're talking about our familial ties. We're talking about the animals. We're talking about our stories. And sometimes it seems like it's just right here. We're also talking about the sky, right? We have a big relationship with the sky and what's going on up here, because that's how we took time. That's how we determined when things were happening or not happening, or special things were going to happen, or when it was halfway through the year, right, with solstices or equinox, right? Tachi just celebrated their new year, which is the spring equinox. One of our big things is the winter solstice. That is like our new year. So, and that goes back to language. Is there a word for solstice? No, it's just time. It's just time. But yeah.
So I have a question. So can you explain why Native Americans do not have a water rights?
Oh, that's a good question. Because that too is part of not being human. That goes back to that first slide, right? Because if I'm moving into a big territory, you don't even exist as a person to me. Why do I think you need water? Right? Which is a big issue for lots and lots of people, right? From having a lake to it being put to sleep, and your whole world evolved around this lake, and now it's asleep. Right? Everybody can move, right? Kenny's going to talk about this next day. Everybody can move, but you're from there. How do you negotiate that? How do some of our other tribes that don't have water rights, and there's rivers running right through their reservation, how do you negotiate that? Right? Water. I think we all need water to live. Right? I think that part's really hard is water. And that's not just a California issue. It's not just a here issue. This is a United States issue. When you're talking about some of the tribes in Arizona, New Mexico fighting for water rights, it's like, wow, that's basic, right? When we're talking about basic human rights, that goes back to NAGPRA, right? That's a human rights law. Still negotiating some of these things that, man, they're so human, and so we're so left out of these things. You'd think that they were just guaranteed, food, water. No, it's not guaranteed. Everything is fought for. Everything is, I don't even know if it's negotiated. It's like you're fighting for these things because you're not getting anything out of it. You're not getting anything. You have to fight for it. Thank you. Thank you, Kenny.
Thank you to each of you so much for being here. I hope that you'll join us next week as we continue this series. Kenny Barrios will be here along with Audrey Osborne to talk about some of these topics further. On your way out, because Cristina mentioned it, some of you may have noticed the watershed art. If you would like to take some of the line drawings that we have of those, you are welcome to them. Our current months are on the back table there. There's more on the other table on the way out. They're free. Take as many as you want. Learn about the plants and the animals here. Please join me in thanking Cristina one more time for her expertise.